You woke under the gray sky of a melancholy autumn, the heavy scent of wet straw clinging stubbornly to your sweat-moistened skin. Your calloused hands traced the rough wood of the small shelter that you had come to call your fortress, a fragile refuge hewn from forgotten scraps, buried deep in the shadows of the village. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying with it the distant creaks of trees that seemed to watch your every move, silent sentinels to your slow, deliberate progress. Even the sharp chill of the morning could not break the monotony of your endless tasks, driving stakes into the earth, weaving vines to bind splintering walls, strengthening fragile barriers barely able to withstand the passage of time, or restless spirits. You understood that the threat was not solely from the cold or wild beasts, but from old tales whispered, in hushed tones, stories of ghosts that prowled the land, eager to invade whatever you built. As you dragged stones and molded clay, the rhythmic tap of your hammer joined the unsettling murmur of ancient legends, a slow dance between mundane toil and encroaching shadow. The village around you lay beneath a mottled veil of mist, dim and colorless like a painting faded by years of rain. The cold dawn painted the sky in muted shades of blue and gray, while the brittle frost cracked beneath your hesitant footsteps. A faint, acrid scent of smoldering wood hung in the air, lingering from the night's waning fire. Your threadbare garment clung to you, coarse and worn, its fibers rough against your skin, a paltry shield against the damp cold. Your hands trembled slightly, a quiet testament to the exhaustion settling into your bones. If today, losing phone battery stirs panic, you imagined how it must have felt then, watching your last chip of fire be swallowed by thin, unforgiving smoke. Every flicker mattered, every ember a fragile pulse against the deepening dark. For a brief moment, warmth bloomed around a small circle where the villagers huddled, a shared flame flickering silently between faces drawn tight with anxiety. You joined them, the glow casting soft shadows on weathered skin, a fleeting comfort before the long night ahead, though the gloom beyond the fire's reach promised no rest. Then the air shifted. The usual distant howling of dogs ceased abruptly, plunging the village into an oppressive silence, heavier than the cold. You caught a flash of uneasy glances exchanged between neighbors, eyes wide and voices dropped to whispers, barely carried on the wind. Something unseen threaded through the stillness, stirring the fragile boundary between safety and the unknown. Before Morpheus fully claims you, make sure you're still subscribed. Some have found the button vanished, and we wouldn't want you to miss what quietly awaits in the next chapter. Take a gentle moment to leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments where you listen from and what time it is there. Your quiet presence keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You rose again beneath the dense, gray canopy, the autumn sky hanging heavily like a wet woolen blanket stretched across the village's fragile roof. Each breath you drew was thick with the damp, earthy scent of fallen leaves rotting slowly into the cold soil. Your feet moved with deliberate hesitation over the frost-lined path, each step cracking softly beneath you. A brittle sound swallowed almost instantly by the restless wind weaving through the skeletal branches above. The air was filled with a subdued chorus of subtle creaks and whispers, the ancient trees around you seeming to hold their breath, shadowy watchers beyond sight, their secrets buried in the rustling canopy. You pressed your palms against your face, the skin rough and cold, still shivering from the night's lingering chill. Your body ached faintly, muscles constricted like taut ropes tightened over days of careful labor. The shelter you had built stood behind you, a fortress both fragile and defiant. It shuddered quietly with each gust, its walls breathing with the weight of your efforts. The vines you bound yesterday, slick with morning dew, clung nervously to splintered wood, unsure if they could hold back the creeping decay, or whatever unseen presence might roam these lands. You traced the coarse surfaces gently, fingers lingering over the cracks and joints where earth, clay, and weathered timber fought an unsteady truce. Outside the fragile haven, the village lay drowned in a heavy, colorless fog, its outlines softened and blurred like a half-remembered dream, fading before waking. The smoke of smoldering fires curled sluggishly upward, blending with the mist in pale spirals that vanished quickly into the gray. Around the dim embers, figures sat huddled, wrapped in threadbare scarves and ragged cloaks, their faces carved by worry and quiet exhaustion. You took your place within their circle, welcomed silently by the shared heat and the flickering glow that painted their skin in hues of amber and shadow. The fire was a fragile heartbeat in the suffocating cold, a small, trembling line between warmth and frost. An uneasy silence crept over the village, deeper than the usual calm before dawn. The distant barking of dogs ceased abruptly, replaced by a hollow quiet so complete it seemed to press against your eardrums. Your gaze shifted between neighboring faces, their eyes shadowed with the same sharp unease that prickled along your spine. Whispers floated like lost ghosts, barely carried on the frigid air. Words clipped and half-formed, filled with warning and dread, but careful to avoid drawing attention. The night had not yet loosened its grip, and within the hush, you could almost hear the land breathing, waiting. You left the firelight reluctantly, the comforting heat slipping away as you crossed the village's narrow streets, now masked in fog. The palpable silence wrapped tightly around you, the cold biting deeper into your bone with every hesitant step. Your hands crept instinctively to the small bundle at your side, a rough cloth-wrapped collection of items, painstakingly gathered for the day ahead. The weight was reassuring, a tether to the world of needed things amid the growing uncertainty. As you reached the faded edge of the village, the ground underfoot seemed softer. The frost nearly vanished beneath a layer of damp earth and scattered leaves. The smell changed too, a faint but unmistakable trace of something older, darker, and more sour, unsettling like the ghost of decay nestled within the fresh rot. You paused, breath catching briefly against the cold. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying faint traces of distant voices, fragmented by distance and fog. Whispers of movement just beyond sight. Your footsteps slowed, each careful footfall pressing into soft earth, the dull thuds swallowed quickly by the mist. Somewhere far off, the low tolling of a cracked bell rose and fell in an uneven rhythm, dissolving almost before it was fully heard. You concentrated on the texture beneath your fingertips as you knelt to gather handfuls of muddy clay to reinforce the base of the shelter. Each pinch of earth felt cold and damp, slipping between your fingers like liquid memory of the rain and time itself. The world seemed hollowed out, stretched thin beneath the weight of stillness, and yet it thrummed faintly with the promise of movement, not of your choosing. The fragile boundary you'd built, brick by brick, held, for now. But in the quiet space between frost and dark, the unknown crouched in the shadows of every tree, in the silence behind every breath. You shifted your gaze upward, patches of cloud swallowing sunlight, reluctant to pierce the heavy sky. A single pale shaft filtered through the branches above, a fragile spotlight on the tangled undergrowth. You focused there, the solitary beam holding a strange comfort, like a whisper of hope threading through the gray. Behind the glow of that thin light, the mist curled and pulsed, shadows weaving together into shapes just beyond recognition. A sudden sound stilled your heart, a soft rustle near the edge of the clearing, the unmistakable scrape of something moving just beneath the leaves. Your breath caught and hung suspended, a thin thread linking you to the shifting shape obscured by fog and earth. The hairs along your arms rose, chills spreading unevenly under your threadbare garment. The moments stretched, fragile and sharp. Then, without warning, the glimpse fled, vanishing like smoke drawn into the trees. The place fell into silence once more, but something in the air had changed. Your hands tightened involuntarily around the crude tool at your side, your eyes scanning the shifting fog with renewed wariness. You understood, with a slow sinking certainty, that this day would not pass as quietly as the ones before, and in that charged stillness, a faint, ominous pulse began to echo, a warning held in the space between breath and shadow, waiting. You knelt again at the edge where earth gave way to fog, your fingers sinking slowly into the wet soil, cool and heavy with the weight of forgotten rains. Each handful clung to your skin like a damp secret, sticky and reluctant as you pressed the clay onward, molding and patching the shelter's foundation with measured care. The vines wrapped yesterday, slick and trembling beneath the dew's fingers, seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing with cautious life, holding your fragile refuge together by the barest thread. The mist hovered low, a thick, somber blanket, pulling the shapes of distant trees and empty fields into softness, dissolving definition, blending everything into a distant memory of shapes half recognized. Your breath caught in slow, shallow pulls, each exhalation fogging before you. Fragile clouds fading quickly into the chill. The earth beneath your knees bore its silent chill deep, creeping through worn fabric and skin alike. You could almost feel the sharp tooth of the cold settle beneath your ribs, a slow settling ache that whispered along every tendon and bone. A faint crack echoed nearby, a brittle sound that seemed too sharp for this place. You froze, the tool in your hand still as a stone, eyes threading through the thick veil of fog. Somewhere, barely beyond sight, a faint shifting unfolded, like fabric caught on a breeze, or dry leaves stirred in a hesitant dance. The wind answered with a soft, hollow moan, threading through skeletal branches, dragging a chill that licked at your neck and down your spine. You rose slowly, back straightening, the shelter's outline a jagged silhouette behind you, trembling gently in the restless breath of the morning air. The vines pressed and whispered against the rough wood, a faint, wet sound, small and continuous, like a slow heartbeat on the edge of hearing. Your gaze wove over the worn planks, the cracked corners where the earth threatened to claim more, and the shivering light that filtered in fragmented beams through sagging spaces. The village beyond was a blurred haze, eyes half open and unsure, faces hidden beneath hoods pulled up against the cold's quiet insinuation. The faint scent of smoke lingered, thin but persistent, curling with wisps of mist into the pale sky. The hollow silence was punctuated only by the soft scrape of footsteps on damp earth, and the low murmur of voices threading through the fog, cautious and clipped, carrying the weight of words never fully spoken, as if the very air pressed tight, lips closed. You gathered your small bundle close, the fabric rough and slightly damp against your palm. It was a small comfort, an anchor to reality in this floating haze, steady and reassuring. Each movement was deliberate but slow, weighed with fatigue that tangled in your limbs like heavy cords. Your skin prickled under the threadbare garment, cold, seeping insistently, biting through every layer as if mocking your efforts. Your feet carried you through narrow lanes, the uneven path slipping beneath your boots, stones suddenly slick with a thin glisten. The fog thickened, folding around you like a living thing, dense and unyielding, swallowing sounds, muting colors, and casting even familiar shapes into strange, uncertain relief. You slowed, breath low and muted in your throat, senses sharpening against this quiet procession of shadows. Ahead, a faint glimmer broke the uniform gray, the dull shimmer of metal caught in the mist, the unmistakable shape of an abandoned cart, half buried beneath a tangled curtain of broken branches and long dead leaves. Your fingers brushed against the rough bark of a nearby tree as you skirted around it, the texture coarse and cold, its ancient rings hidden beneath layers of cracked bark and moss. A sudden snap of brittle twigs shattered the stillness like a faint alarm. Your heart leapt, slow and measured in its pounding, each beat a muted drum. You stood motionless, skin tightening against the cold, every nerve alive to the slightest movement. The fog seemed to pulse closer, curling in twisting shapes that vanished as soon as they appeared, as if the very shadows leaned forward to watch. Turning your attention back to the shelter, you noticed the shifting of one vine, a subtle, restless twitch that had escaped your earlier touch. Your fingers reached out instinctively, tracing the damp, pliant tendrils, feeling the faint pulse beneath its skin. The air tasted of wet earth and forgotten decay, a scent heavy and lingering, pressing against your senses with insistent persistence. You moved carefully back toward the village, each step measured as though weighing the patience of the earth itself. Voices rose softly, a chorus of low murmurs between neighbors, their rhythms weaving together, blending with the sigh of wind and drip of water from bare branches. Everyone waited beneath the weight of the morning, a fragile tension stretched taut like the thin walls of your shelter. Arriving at the circle of shared fire, the hesitant warmth offered a small reprieve, a flickering beacon, soft against the dull haze. You settled close, feeling the slow migration of that fragile heat as it touched skin worn thin by cold and worry. A silent communion of bodies pressed against the gathering chill. The flame-painted faces with trembling gold, hands raised slowly to receive its gentle blessing. A shared moment of fragile solidarity. Yet beyond the circle, shadowed shapes shifted with the fog as breath and breathlessness mingled. A distant bell tolled again, a cracked, uneven note, hanging long before fading into the vast silence. It was the call, a warning whispered in the cracks between moments, pulling the world just out of reach. You leaned slightly forward, eyes searching the dense veil where darkness gathered, waiting patiently between grasp and release. Beneath you, the earth was hushed but restless, a soft vibration like the memory of footsteps long past. You felt it. Then, a fleeting presence brushing the edges of your vision, a silent ripple through the threads of mist. Your breath slowed, frozen in the quiet space where time seemed to stop. The line between known and unknown thinning. A pale glimmer pierced the fog, a faint glint, like ice catching the reluctant touch of sun. A promise lingering just beyond sight. Your heart dragged, drawn toward that fragile light. As shadows gathered close and the chill deepened with whispered intent, the world held its breath with you, and then the silence fractured. You stepped back from the fragile frame you had been tending. The cold clay now settled into the cradling earth beneath the weathered wood. Your fingers lingered, tracing the depth of your touch, trembling faintly as wind stirred the leaves scattered at its base. The fog thickened a little, the mist weaving low across the uneven ground, blending shadows where familiar shapes once stood separate. Your breath hovered before you, pale and transient, like hesitant spirits reluctant to linger. Each step you took was cushioned by wet moss and rotting leaves, their dampness squelching softly beneath your boots. The chill crept up slowly, threading through wool, skin, and bone, a persistent reminder that the day would not warm easily. You paused for a moment at the threshold of the village, beyond which the skeletal trees stood sentinel, their gnarled limbs twisting in silent testimony to countless forgotten seasons. The muted rustle of old branches brushing together carried a delicate whisper, almost imperceptible but ever present, a faint stirring beneath the heavy silence. Somewhere distant, the river murmured, its ceaseless psalm a low, steady pulse, threading through the fabric of the morning. As you moved forward, the flickering remnants of firelight in the village square cast a weak golden hue against the pale faces gathered there. They were shadows within shadows, bundled in threadbare shawls or clutches of worn wool, hands folded tight or gripping the rough fabric of coats that no longer held full warmth. You joined the circle quietly, the heat nudging your chilled skin, a brief sanctuary against the unyielding cold. The smoke curled upward in wisps, thin and nearly invisible under the heavy sky, carrying the faint scent of smoldering wood and damp earth. A subtle change stirred the air. The whispered conversations ebbed, voices falling away to fragile silence, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the occasional soft snap of a branch underfoot. Somewhere on the edge of hearing, a low bell knelled, uneven, fractured, a slow, subtle call that sank into the bones of the village itself. Eyes met briefly, shadows flickering with careful caution, as each person seemed to listen for a sound just beyond the edge of perception. You rose, drawn by an impulse shaped by anticipation and the persistence of unease. With deliberate slowness, each footfall was a muted chord on the damp earth, the cold mud sliding faintly under your boots. A village streets, narrow and worn, twisted away through curling mists, their edges softened into shadow. Shapes lurked in the periphery, forgotten carts half buried beneath tangled branches, broken fences leaning like weary sentinels. The scent of damp bark and decayed leaves deepened, folded into the breeze like a whispered warning. Your fingers brushed along the bark of a nearby tree, rough and cold with lichen and moss, the irregular ridges digging into your skin with a quiet insistence. The shelter's earlier vines, glistening with collected moisture, seemed almost alive beneath your touch, a subtle pulsation vibrating through their thin stems as if responding to the charged stillness around you. You let your breath slip slow and steady, counting its steady rhythm against the faint drum of your own pulse. Suddenly, your attention snagged on a faint sound, a rustling beneath the leaf litter, delicate but deliberate, like the soft scraping of claws against damp bark. Your heart slowed, each beat a careful measure in the stillness. Eyes narrowed, you tracked the subtle movements through thickening fog that coiled and swirled with teasing visibility. The shapes twisted, vanished, then reformed, teasing your gaze like smoke caught in an unseen current. Steps, careful and hesitant, you edged toward the clearing beyond the village, a muted expanse painted in grayscale under the dense autumn sky. The cold had sharpened the edges of everything, the brittle crack of dead twigs, the wet sheen on fallen leaves, the faint scent of something older and more bitter beneath the loam. Your hands settled into the familiar task of collecting handfuls of cold earth, pressing it patiently into the base of the shelter's foundation, each pinch a small act of defiance against the slow decay. The moment stretched thin, the boundary between solitude and intrusion, fragile and trembling. A chill slid down your neck, gooseflesh rising beneath threadbare fabric. Yet, just as the oppressive weight of silence settled, a soft glow captured your eye, a slender shaft of pale light filtering faintly through a break in the clouded canopy. It danced gently over damp roots and tangled underbrush, a fragile presence cradled. Within the gloom, you held your breath, drawn toward the faint warmth it offered, a solitary promise stitched into the muted landscape. But behind that fragile gleam, the fog twisted anew, a shifting silhouette just beyond clarity, moving with the slow inevitability of shadow slipping over stone. The ground beneath you seemed to pulse, a quiet throb, felt rather than heard, as if the very earth remembered footsteps long vanished. A distant echo of that cracked bell floated once more, chilling and tentative, threading through the still air like a warning half remembered. your hands clenched slowly around the crude haft of your tool, knuckles paling as the breath within you caught in the suspended moment. The village waited, the fog whispered, and something unseen hovered just at the edge, watching, waiting, the fragile boundary poised to fracture. You lingered at the edge of the village once more, the damp earth cool beneath your knees, pressed softly into the folds of frosted leaves. Each handful of soil stuck stubbornly to your skin, cold and reluctant, as though holding on to secrets it dared not release. Above, the gray canopy stretched, dense and heavy, swallowing the feeble light with patient greed. Your breath left you in quick, fragile clouds, pale and fleeting in the chill morning air. The thin vines clinging to your shelter quivered gently where your fingers rested, slick with dew, whispering a quiet, trembling promise. The wood beneath your touch was rough and splintered, burdened by time and weather. You could almost feel the slow surrender hidden in its grain, like the fading pulse of a heartbeat long ignored. The mist thickened, wrapping the village in a shroud of muted shapes and softened edges. The familiar became strange, bleached of color and certainty. A quiet crack sounded, a brittle fragment breaking loose from the cold morning. Instinct pulled you upright, your eyes slicing through the dense veil, looking for a cause. The trees beyond swayed faintly, their skeletal branches creaking in the restless wind. Somewhere, the soft shuffle of movement brushed against the dead leaves. Your hands tightened around the tool you carried, nails pressing into the chipped wood. The air tasted of damp earth and hidden decay, sour and faint but unrelenting. You stepped away from your fragile refuge, each footfall careful and deliberate, muffled by layers of rot and moss. The village's worn paths folded away beneath thickening fog, twisting back into shadows like lost memories stored deep in earth. The few faces gathered near flickering embers were ghost-like, painted in trembling amber and shadow, their expressions taut with shared worry. You settled beside them, the feeble heat pressing against chilled skin, a brief and fragile comfort pressed between breaths. The silence deepened. The usual murmur of the villagers took on a strange hesitancy, nerves concealed beneath thin words and sidelong glances. Somewhere off, a bell tolled again, cracking the stillness with uneven chimes that echoed faintly between half-forgotten rooftops. The sound trembled through your limbs, a fragile thread pulling taut in the dark fabric of the morning. Eyes met briefly, understanding settling like a quiet pact. The cold had sharpened senses. You could almost hear the breath of the land itself, shallow and waiting. Rising slowly, you moved from the circle of warmth back into the shrouded streets. The fog swallowed sound and light, swallowing shapes and softening textures, until the world was reduced to whispers of presence and absence. Your steps traced patterns over slick stones and patches of worn earth, each movement measured and slow, as though testing the patience of the cold itself. The rough bark of a gnarled tree slid beneath your fingertips, coarse and reassuring through the thin fabric of your sleeve. Once more, the shelter drew nearer, your defense against the deepening gloom. The vines shivered with moisture, stretched tight across splintered wood, straining under the weight of unseen burdens. You knelt to inspect the foundation, pressing clay slowly between fingers stiff with cold, feeling the reluctant slide of damp earth as it clung and yielded unevenly. The shelter breathed with the day, trembling gently beneath gusts that carried whispered warnings. A soft shift nearby seized your attention, dry leaves rustling against the creeping fog, a movement at once deliberate and elusive. Your breath slowed to nearly stop. The air seemed to tighten, drawing you into a moment held precariously between calm and something far less certain. The gray mist curled and twisted with hidden shapes, shadows that slipped just beyond the reach of sight. The pulse of something unseen pressed softly against the edges of your perception. A faint glimmer caught your eye, a fragile shaft of pale light breaking briefly through the thick canopy above. It spilled lightly over damp roots and tangled underbrush, a delicate glow cradled by the heavy air. You leaned toward that slender beacon, drawn by its quiet insistence, a fragile promise caught in a world dimmed by long shadows. The earth under your palms vibrated faintly, a soft echo, like the long-lost memory of footsteps quickened, then stilled. The distant bell tolled painfully once more, its cracked resonance threading through fog and frost, a hesitant call drifting on the damp wind. Your grip tightened around the handle of your tool, knuckles white as a shiver ran deep along your spine. Behind the fragile glow, movement flickered again, shadow shapes weaving slowly among twisted branches, dissolving into mist before re-emerging like smoke reluctant to fade. The silence stretched thin, taut as a wire straining beneath quiet load. Your heartbeat slowed to match that rhythm, caught in a suspended breath held tight between the known and the unknown. You felt it then, a presence hovering just at the periphery, neither threat nor comfort, but a quiet weight settled between moments. The shelter trembled beneath your touch, the vines whispering in damp tongues, the earth alive beneath your knees, a slow, steady rhythm pulsing with something ancient. The sky, heavy and gray, almost seemed to lean closer, folding the day in thick layers of oppressive stillness. And there, at the edge of the clearing, something stirred anew. A form half-seen, shifting with the fog, waiting patiently just beyond the fragile boundary. The soft scrape of movement blended seamlessly with the sighing wind, carrying a quiet warning into your marrow. your eyes fixed on the wavering shadow, held fast by the weight of an unspoken anticipation, the fragile light fading beneath the dense grip of the encroaching gray. The day held its breath. The village waited, and beneath it all, the quiet pulse grew, lingering, unresolved, unrelenting, poised on the cusp of what was to come next. You paused at the edge, where the village's outline blurred once again, the fog thickening to swallow even the faint shimmer of your shelter's silhouette. The damp earth felt heavy beneath your boots, a reluctant weight that pulled each step into slow, methodical motion. Your fingers brushed against the rough bark of a nearby tree, its cold texture sinking into your skin, grounding you against the rising tide of uncertainty. The breath you drew was sharp but shallow, the chill settling like wet stone within your lungs. Around you, the mist wove through the skeletal branches, drifting silently as though it carried whispers beyond reach. The faint scent of smoke from the fading fires mingled with the earthy rot beneath your feet, a scent heavy with memory and loss. Your eyes traced the fluttering movements of brittle leaves, trembling in the weak pulse of the wind before tumbling silently to the sodden ground. Behind you, the shelter stood fragile and faint, the vines clinging tightly to its timbers, slick and unyielding in the morning dew. You knelt once more, hands folding around damp clumps of cold clay, pressing patches where the earth threatened to unravel your work. Each pinch slipped reluctantly through your fingers, the dampness clinging like a secret you could neither fully grasp nor let go. Beneath that layer of cold mud, your foundation whispered the slow exhaustion of time pressing ever forward. The village beyond woke quietly, faces drawn tight beneath threadbare scarves as they stirred in their tentative gathering. Flickering flames, fragile and frail, reached upward like waning spirits in a sky of ash and gray. You felt the warmth call, a soft pulse against the endless cold that wrapped around your shoulders like a second skin. Standing slowly, you moved toward the faint glow, your footsteps muted by the thickening mist. As you drew near, the soft warmth of the fire flickered across faces hollowed by sleepless nights and whispered fears. Around its fragile circle, bodies huddled close, a silent communion bound by shared exhaustion and the thin thread of hope that flickered so briefly in their tired eyes. You settled quietly beside them, feeling the faint migration of heat as it kissed skin roughened by cold and vigilance. The wool of your garment clung damp and coarse, pressing against your skin as you inhaled the mingled scents of smoke, earth, and slow, steady breath. Suddenly, the air shifted. The familiar chorus of distant animal calls disappeared altogether, swallowed by a silence so deep it pressed uncomfortably against your eardrums. Shadows pooled thick and unmoving just beyond the firelight, swallowing shape and color. The wind stilled, as if the whole village waited, holding breath beneath the gray canopy. Whispers curled among the gathered, hushed and careful. Soft breaths threading through the cold, weaving a fabric of restrained tension. Your gaze flicked upward, catching faint glimpses of movement between the gnarled branches above. The branches, like arthritic fingers, scraped softly against one another with a brittle rhythm. Somewhere distant, the faint, irregular tolling of a cracked bell shivered through the silence, a hesitant summons that echoed off damp walls and empty windows. The note lingered long enough to fray nerves, but dissolved before it could anchor itself fully in the air. Hands tucked against your ribs for warmth, you rose and stepped away, the circle of light waning behind you. Your feet sank slightly into the softened earth, the ground yielding with a faint, wet groan beneath every hesitant step. The fog embraced you, thickening further, draping its pallid veil over familiar streets, now unrecognizable in the muted gray. Shapes shifted just beyond sight, quick and deliberate, like smoke unwilling to disperse. A sudden rustle near a broken fence caught your attention. Dry leaves stirred by a subtle scrape, delicate but decisive. Your breath caught and held tight, slow and tethered in the cold air. Fingertips found a cracked post, rough and mottled with moss, steadying you against the quiet surge of dread creeping from the shadows. The shelter, your fragile refuge, whispered encouragement with faint creaks, its breath slow and uneven in the chilled silence. You trace the damp vines once more, feeling their cool slickness, as if they breathed beneath your touch. The earth smelled pungently of hidden roots and forgotten decay, a sourness folded beneath the freshness of wet leaves. Each breath filled your lungs with the slow, liquid chill of the morning, threading light ice along the inside of your chest. Your limbs ached with the weight of vigilance, muscles tied tight in a slow knot that would not relent. The path led you forward, through narrow lanes bordered by skeletal trees, their limbs twisting overhead, forming grim arches that framed the heavy sky. Between the wavering shadows, the mossy stones marked silent steps of those who had passed before, their presence woven into the cold fabric beneath your soles. The fog clung stubbornly to the contours of earth and stone, erasing the certainty of distance until everything flattened into a soft monotone of light and shade. Ahead, a sudden flicker caught your gaze, a fragile gleam reflected in cold metal half buried in rotting leaves. The edge of an abandoned blade? A rusted tool? You could not tell, but the sharp glint sliced through the fog with uneasy clarity. You shifted your weight, senses sharpening as the chill deepened, and the silence thickened around you like wet wool. Your heart beat slow but insistent, a measured drum between ribs aching with the memory of sleepless watches. The cracked bell tolled again, its uneven echo rippling through the heavy air and clinging to the silent trees like a warning long since repeated and still unheeded. The sound faded, swallowed completely, and only the restless fog remained, curling and shifting in silent dance, as if alive with secrets. A movement passed at the edge of your vision, soft and fluid, no more than a shadow slipping between the gnarled trunks. You turned slowly, eyes searching the shifting gray. Every sense alert to things unseen. The wind caught the leaves at your feet, carrying the faintest trace of a cold breath against your cheek, a whisper pressing close, but just out of reach. You slowed, breath tightening, muscles taut as wire stretched thin. The shelter stood behind you like a lone heartbeat, its fragile walls trembling with the soft, persistent thrum of the earth itself. Your fingers tightened around your tool's worn haft, knuckles pale. The mist curled closer, thick and patient, folding all sound and sight into its waiting arms. And beneath the heavy gray sky, you understood at last. There was no longer any place untouched, no refuge beyond the reach of the watching silence that deepened with every heartbeat. The fog had thickened, swallowing the thin ray of light lingering just beyond the tangled branches. You stood at the edge of the clearing, breath shallow and steady, every fiber taut with silent vigilance. The earth beneath you retained its cold weight, damp and unyielding, its heavy pulse faint beneath your fingertips. You felt it, a slow breath held in the stillness, as though the world itself was waiting for a fragile moment to shift. Your hands, rough from work and chilled through worn fabric, withdrew from the damp clay you had been pressing into the shelter's base. The vines there trembled faintly, sticky with dew, whispering secrets you could barely grasp. Quiet echoes of time and decay, bound together in fragile tension. The shelter, your fortress and frailty, shivered softly in the restless wind, the wood creaking beneath the lingering weight of years and memory. A thin mist curled around your ankles, cold and persistent, slipping through cracks in worn boots to touch skin that no longer surprised you with its sensitivity. Your eyes traced the wavering shapes of skeletal trees, their branches scratching faint rhythms against a sky suffocated by thick gray clouds. The usual chorus of morning sounds, the distant calls of birds, the rustle of small creatures, had fallen silent, swallowed whole by the oppressive stillness. Only the hollow toll of the cracked bell floated faintly through the damp air, its uneven notes disintegrating among the shadows like fragile warnings cast to the wind. You inhaled deeply, the mixture of earth and smoke filling your lungs, with a bitterness that settled low then slow. The faint acrid taste clung to your tongue, a reminder of fires long since burned to embers, now nothing more than whispers in the cold. Each breath felt heavier, laden with a weight that pressed from all sides. Damp mist, worn wood, the invisible watchfulness cloaking the land. The village lay just beyond your reach, silhouettes blurred and softened beneath the shroud of fog. Your footsteps were slow, deliberate, muffled by the squelchy moss and the rotting leaves that carpeted the uneven ground. The weight of your small bundle at your side pressed quietly against your palm, the solitary tether in the pervasive haze. The fabric wrapped tightly, damp and coarse, carrying the faint scent of earth and threadbare fiber. Ahead, a faint glimmer caught the edge of your vision, a quick flicker like the reflection of cold metal half buried beneath the soggy leaves. You paused, heart tightening as your gaze locked on the unreachable gleam. The shadowed form near it shifted, a slow movement stitched into the fog's fabric, dissolving before you could fully focus. The mumbled scent of something older, sour and biting, crept beneath the damp earth, unsettling in its persistence. The narrow lanes of the village beckoned, weaving between crumbling fences and forgotten carts tangled in vines and shadow. As you moved, your fingers brushed against the bark of a weathered tree, its cold, rough texture grounding your senses in the immediate moment. The wind sighed softly, threading through the bare branches, carrying whispers of half-remembered stories, the restless echoes of footsteps long faded, faint and fading, like a dream slipping away. You slowed, the uneasy silence folding in closer as the fog thickened. The faint murmur of voices rose, then fell away, a hesitant chorus of cautious breaths, muffled beneath worn scarves and limp shawls. The circle of fire flickered weakly, a fragile heart pulsing dim warmth into the gathering cold. You slipped quietly to its edge, the glow kissing your chilled skin with tentative comfort. Around you, faces were gaunt and drawn, shadows painted with flickering amber and rising fear. The stillness deepened. The usual symphony of mourning broke abruptly as the village seemed to hold its breath. The distant howling of dogs ceased, an absence both sudden and profound. A hush settled over the gathering, heavy and near suffocating. Whispers curled softly through the cold air, words clipped and cautious, threading invisible warnings into the fragile tension that wrapped the huddled. Figures like a thin, shaking veil, your gaze lifted instinctively toward the twisted branches above. The skeletal limbs scraped gently, sounding like dry bones rubbing together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, the bell tolled again, a fractured call stretching and breaking before fading entirely, leaving long shadows in its wake. You turned away from the circle, each step muffled by the sodden earth, moving back toward the fragile safety of your shelter. The vines clinging tightly to the weathered timbers shivered faintly beneath your touch, cool and sticky with dew, their slow pulse almost imperceptible but persistent, a reminder that your work was both defense and defiance against the encroaching gloom. The sharp scent of damp earth deepened, enriched by whispered notes of decay, buried beneath the dead leaves. The cold sank steadily through threadbare wool, sinking ice into bones already wearied by long nights and endless waiting. Your muscles ached, tied in a slow, unyielding knot, a reminder of the price paid for survival in this place where light faltered and shadows gathered close. A soft rustle broke the hush, dry leaves scraping against one another, carried by a subtle, deliberate motion just beyond sight. Your breath caught, slowing to a shallow hold within your chest. The fog thickened, folding and twisting like a living thing eager to conceal and reveal in equal measure. Shapes flickered at the edge of the haze, elusive and teasing, dissolving like smoke caught in a reluctant breeze. You knelt again at the base of the shelter, gathering handfuls of cold clay in slow, steady motions. The earth's weight was heavy in your hands, damp and unyielding, as if reluctant to surrender whatever secrets it carried within. Each patch pressed felt fragile, a small bastion against the inevitable erosion of time and silence. The pale light, filtering through the dense canopy above, shifted subtly. A slender shaft falling across tangled roots and fallen branches, a delicate promise amid the gloom. You held your breath, drawn to the quiet warmth, enfolding the fading day, a brief reprieve before the turn of shadow. But then the fog stirred once more, and movement shadowed the light, a slow, weaving silhouette, neither friend nor foe, waiting patiently in the gray void. The earth pulsed faintly beneath you, an echo of footsteps long vanished, a rhythm lost to time and waiting. Your fingers tightened on the haft of your tool, knuckles bleaching white, breath suspended in the fragile moment. Beyond the reach of sight, the silent watcher held its place, lingering just beyond the threshold, and there, beneath the leaden sky, space. The day's breath caught, waiting for the next silence to break. You stepped back from the fragile shelter, the damp earth pressed cold against your knees, the clay now settled firm beneath your hands. The vines, slick with dew, strained gently against the weathered wood, whispering faint, restless breaths as the thick fog curled low around your feet. Your fingers lingered briefly on the rough bark of a nearby tree, its coarse texture grounding you, an anchor in the drifting gray. The cold clung stubbornly beneath your threadbare garment, biting into skin and bone, a persistent ache that tangled with the slow weariness threading through your muscles. The village lay shrouded in a dense veil of mist, shapes looming and shifting just beyond reach, their outlines soft and uncertain, like fading memories. The fire's feeble glow barely pierced the gathering gloom, its warmth a tentative pulse beneath the heavy sky. As you moved away, the echo of the bell's uneven toll drifted again, a cracked, lingering sound that melted back into the silence, joining the dull chorus of dripping water and whispering leaves. The creature's distant calls, once steady and watchful, had fallen mute. The absence deepened the stillness, a shadow folded into the very breath of the morning. Your footsteps pressed softly onto the sodden earth, each careful movement muffled beneath layers of rotted leaves and moss. The air was thick with the scent of cold stone and wet decay, an ancient earth scent that hugged your senses with cold fingers, teasing shapes that dissolved like smoke caught on an invisible current. You glanced back toward the shelter. The thin vines pulsed faintly beneath the gathering moisture, a fragile thread binding wood and earth against the inevitable pull of time and silence. Your hands, rough and chilled, returned to patch the cracked plaster, each slow press a quiet defiance. The shelter stood, worn and wavering, a fragile bastion against the encroaching shadow that wove through the village's edges. The forest's skeletal branches scraped faintly against the leaden sky, a brittle rhythm weaving through the cool hush. Shadows swayed just beyond your sight, blending and parting like breath held taut. Somewhere close, the low murmur of voices rose briefly, muted, cautious, careful to veil their words in soft undertones before falling silent again, like leaves settling on still water. The weight of unspoken fears hung in the chill, breath held beneath an oppressive gray ceiling. You pressed your palms against the earth, drawing slow breaths, the cold seeping patiently through fabric and skin. Your fingers traced the damp soil, sticky and reluctant, each handful a softened memory of rain and time, pressing the shelter's base with deliberate care. The vines quivered, trembling in tandem with your slow movements, as if sensing the fragile balance weighed between survival and surrender. Your gaze lifted through curling mist to a sliver of pale light, pushing weakly past the thick canopy. It spilled in slender beams over the knotted roots and tangled underbrush, a quiet, fleeting warmth threading through the gray gloom. You held that light close, a fragile promise trembling against the vast weight of waiting shadows. A sudden rustle arrested your breath. Dry leaves skittered across the sodden ground, their whisper sharp in the stretched silence. Your eyes narrowed, searching the shifting fog, every muscle coiled in slow, deliberate tension. The shapes moved with the patience of slow flames, subtle contours folding into one another, just out of clarity. Shadows woven of mist and ancient breath. The cracked bell tolled again, its uneven notes spiraling upward, faint but insistently threading through the cold air, like a warning etched in sound. The echoes clung to the bare branches, fading slowly into the thick quiet, leaving you suspended between moments, between the known refuge and the encroaching unknown. Your hands tightened around the wooden haft of your tool, knuckles fading pale beneath threadbare skin. A shiver traced your spine, the restless pulse of the land, pressing soft but relentless beneath your soles. The vines whispered beneath your touch, their slick skins pulsing with a damp life that unnerved even as it reassured. You stepped forward, each footfall a muted thud, swallowed quickly by the moisture-warmed earth. The village streets stretched before you, warped under the fog's heavy breath. Each twist and turn softened and blurred. The scent of smoldering wood mingled faintly with the harsher tang of rotting leaves and damp stone. A discordant harmony threaded into the morning's fragile rhythm. Near the worn edge of a forgotten path, the faint glint of metal caught your eye, a sliver of sharp light buried beneath fallen branches and matted leaves. The flash wavered, barely seen, but it pulled at the silence, threading a thin line of sharp awareness through the haze. You hesitated, breath steadying slow and even, heart beating a measured cadence beneath the cold's relentless press. A subtle movement stirred just beyond the trees, a shadow folding into the thickness of the fog. Your gaze fixed, trying and failing to unravel the shifting swirl of gray and dark. The rustle returned, softer now, a whispered breath on the edge of hearing. Your senses sharpened, tracing the slow weaving of something unseen, something neither mortal nor wholly other. The shelter beckoned, a fragile silhouette against the dense mist. You felt the earth pulse again beneath your knees, a muted rhythm like footsteps echoing through time. Distant, yet insistent, the vines clung tighter, their gentle tremble a muted heartbeat in the cold morning air. The pale light faded slowly, swallowed by the pulling folds of fog. The cracked bell tolled one last time, shrinking into the silence with a fading, fragile plea. And beneath the gray weight of sky and shadow, you understood an unyielding truth settled deep. Whatever watched from beyond the veil was no longer content to wait. You stood quietly at the edge of the clearing, the weight of the gray sky pressing gently on your shoulders, as if the entire world exhaled in a long, slow sigh. The mist had begun to loosen its grip, withdrawing like tentative fingers retreating from the earth's bare skin. You traced the last patches of damp clay on your shelter's foundation, feeling how the cold, sticky earth now clung less fiercely to your hands. The vines, once trembling with uncertain life, now rested softly against the weathered wood, as though lulled into a patient sleep. Behind you, The village stirred quietly, the faintest breath of movement slipping through narrow lanes. Faces once etched with tension carried gentler lines, eyes less shadowed by the frost of fear. Lips no longer tightly pressed against silence. The fire's dim flame blinked steadily, no longer a fragile heartbeat, but a steady pulse, knitting together the cold with threads of flickering warmth. Together, you and the villagers had held the night at bay. The dread that once thickened the fog had thinned, dissipated by the slow, deliberate persistence of your small fortress. The wind exchanged a softer murmur among the skeletal branches overhead, their brittle fingers swaying with a newfound tenderness. Somewhere far off, the cracked bell tolled once more, its uneven notes now a steady song, a quiet herald that the long vigil was drawing to rest. The sound rolled gently over the village, carrying with it a promise of calm, a rhythm attuned not to warning, but to consolation. You inhaled deeply, the cold air laced with the mingled scents of damp earth, smoke lost to memory, and the faint sweetness of fallen leaves beginning their final decay. The chill no longer bit sharply. It softened into a cool embrace, a fading echo of all thee. Nights spent shivering beneath this same heavy sky. Your breath came slow and even, exhaling the tension that had gripped your limbs for so long. As you stepped forward, the damp ground beneath your boots seemed to cradle each footfall, cushioning the weariness in your joints. The shelter creaked just once, a soft, settling sound, before falling silent, held in place by the patient vines and the careful, steady hands that had crafted it from nothing. The fragile refuge you had built was no longer a mere barricade against shadows, but a testament to endurance and hope, carved out in mud and wood. Moving through the quiet village square, you noticed small signs of life blooming despite the frost. The kitten stretched lazily near a twisted root, a few leaves swirling upward in a slow, lazy dance. The smoke from the lingering embers traced delicate spirals into the pale light, as if weaving the day's first breath with invisible thread. The villagers, too, began to stir, hands unclenching, shoulders releasing, the shared weight of unspoken fears lifting slowly as dawn edged closer. Your gaze wandered upward, where the heavy clouds began to part softly. Pale sunlight filtered through the thinning mist, a slender shaft of warmth, threading the gray with subtle gold. It touched the soft moss beneath your feet and danced upon the shelter's fragile frame, warming splintered edges and damp wood alike. This quiet light promised more than just daybreak. It signaled renewal, the slow, sure turning of the world's great wheel. For a moment, you simply stood there, letting the stillness envelop you, not the suffocating silence. Again, a distant crow cawed from the trees, and the rustling of small feet stirred beneath the underbrush. Life whispered back into the shadows. The uneasy presence that had hovered now seemed drawn away, lured beyond the veil of waking daylight, no longer a threat looming over fragile peace. The earth underfoot felt steadier, the gentle pulse of time flowing beneath your knees less ominous and more like a steady, grounding heartbeat. The vines clung in a quiet solidarity, woven threads that bound not just wood and clay, but moments of resolve, patience, and survival. You knelt once more at the base of your shelter, pressing your rough hands into the cold earth, letting the touch ground your tired body and restless mind. No haste now, only the slow rhythm of acceptance. The shelter, imperfect and delicate, stood firm as a quiet guardian against the perils that once prowled the night. A soft breeze traced the air, carrying the gentle scent of rain yet to fall, and the subtle warmth of the sun beginning its journey across a sky brushed faintly with color. Leaves stirred above, tumbling silently in their slow descent, heralding the close of a chapter and the unhurried turning toward what comes next. You rose, every movement fluid and measured, a quiet testament to endurance through the darkest hours. As you stepped beyond the shelter's protective side, you carried with you the fragile peace that now wove through the village, the steadfast pulse of community, forged in whispered fear and shared warmth. The gray canopy lifted gently, revealing a stretch of dawn that was neither sharp nor overwhelming, but a soft unfolding of light that embraced the land like a whispered lullaby. Here, in this moment, the nights, waiting broke open into calm, a space where shadows recede and the world exhales. You walked slowly back toward the gathering places of the village, where voices began to rise, gentle and tentative, weaving into a tapestry of quiet strength. The mist receded with the day, folding away the last of its secrets, leaving behind a world softened by time and the tender hands of those who refused to surrender. And as your eyes traced the familiar outlines of trees, earth, and sky, the heavy gray lifted fully at last, revealing the promise of a new day, one cradled in patience, resilience, and the gentle hope that carries us through the coldest nights. The journey was slow, but it was enough. Now, with the first true warmth seeping gently into the air, you could finally rest. The world whispered its soft goodnight, quiet, complete, and at peace.